Process to Perform, helping you harness potential on the way to greatness. I'm your host, Mike Wall. Thanks as always for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or Spotify. I know the impact of this pandemic has gone far beyond sports, and I just hope that what we discuss here is hopefully a welcome distraction from many of the real problems that each one of us face every day with regards to the current reality. And that being said, there's really not a better time to focus on your process than right now. We have the opportunity, we have the time, let's take full advantage of it. Optimistically, I look at the isolation period as a time for athletes to hit the reset button. I want to help you identify and work on your major areas of opportunity. And as players, parents, and coaches, you may never have another chance to really foster curiosity, self-awareness, and intrinsic motivation like we have right now. And we've spent a good amount of time discussing non-negotiable character traits and the building blocks of becoming a master of your craft, most notably technique. We haven't spent a lot of time from the coach's perspective. Coaching, teaching is one of the hardest things to do, especially in team sports. There's a handful of personalities, they all have different learning styles, and they all require different forms of attention. Some of the best coaches I've ever been around are not the absolute best play designers, or they don't have the most complicated drills. It's often been the opposite. The coaches that have made the biggest impact on me have all had similar qualities. They're demanding, they're detailed, and most importantly, they are genuinely interested in their players. For those coaches, the focus was about getting the most out of the athlete, understanding that developing the athlete would, over the long term, help them run a better program. A big reason that this podcast is around is because I want aspiring athletes to take control of their careers and understand those dials that they need to turn for themselves. What better time than right now while we're in isolation? With that, I have a set of core convictions that lead my thinking when putting together programs for athletes. My hope is that saying these out loud will prompt some thought and discussion between players, parents, and coaches on how to best maximize the development of your athlete when they're working largely on their own. We want to teach them how to learn, not just memorize a move or skill, but integrate how they are learning skills repeatedly, the process or the methodology, so that they can form connections between process and results. Remember, knowing how to think is better than knowing what to think, and teaching them how to think is better than teaching them what to think. This, over the long term, is far more valuable than blindly following directions. We want curious athletes. We want our players to think independently and find solutions on their own. So here are my core convictions when putting together programs for athletes. Number one, process-based. I'm sure this is no surprise. For this episode, I want to take a look at the process from the perspective of a coach or a parent. How does your athlete respond to you having a strong process? The number one thing is building trust. The athlete has to buy in that we can improve the outcome by focusing on the process, not constantly looking at the scoreboard. And this is the easiest thing to justify and the hardest thing to execute, especially as you rise through the ranks and there's more pressure to win. But if you as a parent or a coach can demonstrate that you are more interested in the process than the outcome, this will help develop a trust not only in yourself, but what you're putting that athlete through. It also builds a confidence in that athlete that allows them to play freer, to try new things, to experiment. And ultimately, that's going to improve their skill set. The athlete will give the most when they feel confident in their environment. When they're comfortable with our process, it's much easier to navigate difficult situations. Because the ball is not going to bounce the right way every time. You're not guaranteed to win because collectively we're trying to do the right things. But we can certainly build on process knowing that more often than not, if we do those things correctly, if we go through the right steps, we will be successful. So at the developmental level, I think the idea is easy to vibe with, but at the highest level, as I've stated before, this is where great coaches separate themselves from everyone else. Number two, technique. Technique is the means by which we channel our aggression with precision and accuracy. I want to take a slightly different approach to technique. We've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast. As an athlete, technique is really your calling card. When you turn on film, it's the thing about you that stands out from everyone else. As a coach, you want to put out athletes that their technique jumps off the screen. A great technician can flourish in any scheme against any opponent. When we actively make that decision to be detailed and disciplined with our footwork, with our body posture, our shooting form, it's much easier to make adjustments from a strong technical foundation and a point of confidence and conviction in how we operate. Contrast that with poor technical execution of a sound scheme or good framework. Now, as players, parents, and coaches, we're now beating ourselves over the head because the play should have worked. We should have won the game, but it didn't. This is often because with failed technique comes an accumulation of losses in individual matchups. And with enough individual losses, you don't have a very good chance of winning the game. So technique, from a coaching perspective, it is the best gift, right, that you can give an athlete, because we've talked about all the other ancillary benefits of developing technique, but ultimately it does become their calling card. They can go anywhere, any scheme, any team, execute. Number 3, simplicity. And this is why I break everything down from complex ideas and complex movement patterns into simple movements and simple thoughts. It's easy to be detailed and disciplined when we're talking about a series of small movements or small ideas. I think from a technique standpoint, this is a very easy concept to grasp. Technically, the advantage of talking with simplicity and breaking things down into simple movement patterns is it allows us to be very detailed in what our expectations are. If we looked at, if anybody out there has ever been to different coaches in soccer, the really disciplined, detailed coaches are going to get you to touch the ball with a very specific part of the foot. Your hips are going to be turned a certain way. Your plant foot is going to be pointing a certain direction, and they start talking in degrees and angles and inches. In my sport, when you discuss things like blocking or tackling, these are large concepts, but breaking them down into simple patterns really promotes higher level thought, higher level discussion, because we can be more detailed about the specificity of the movement patterns we're asking those athletes, aspiring athletes, to perform. And what is the benefit for an athlete? That amount of detail as you're learning the process, now you have a very structured foundational platform that as you grow, as things become more complicated, as adjustments are made during games, you have a strong foundation and a confidence in your foundation that you can make adjustments from. And that's really, I think, the theme of all of this as we talk from the coaching perspective. Can you build this strong foundation so that your athletes are comfortable making adjustments? So from a technique standpoint, I think it's an easy concept to grasp. But from a scheme or objective of the match perspective, this is also incredibly simple. What does a great coach tell you? If you walk into a meeting room and you're playing a very important game against a great opponent, the best coaches in the world get everybody on the same page by telling them what they're trying to do. Obviously, that goes beyond winning the game, but how they're going to do it, who they're going to exploit. This team has this player we're going to exploit. This team runs this scheme that we're looking to exploit in the fewest words possible. Because now everybody in the room feels very confident that they have a solid game plan, that it's been communicated to them in a fashion that everyone understands what the general perspective is on the upcoming match. And now we can go into our portions of the match that are very specific to us and become incredibly detailed because we understand the overarching concept. It's a simple idea. We're going to exploit this scheme. We're going to exploit this individual, and that's how we're going to be victorious. Big picture ideas are simple. I'll give you an example. I was on the sidelines for a Miami Dolphins, New England Patriots game years ago, and the Patriots, of course, have been the best team in NFL for the last 20 years, and what they were doing on offense was so incredibly simple yet effective that it was dumbfounding to, I think, everybody in attendance that why isn't everybody doing this? And obviously there's a lot of answers that go into that, but they were running a 2x2, so they were running a scheme where they had two receivers on both sides of the quarterback. The tight ends, the larger players, were split out. And then we had slot receivers. The tight ends would motion in, and that would help declare what the defense was. Are they playing man-to-man? Are they playing zone? And from there, they immediately knew what play they were going to run, and it was usually it was very simple. They were going to either run a very quick pattern, or they were going to run the ball based on whether or not somebody came in. Did they bump in the defense, or did they follow in the defense? And as soon as they figured that out, the quarterback would make the call, and they ran this over and over and over. It felt like they ran it 90% of the game. I know they didn't, but it felt like every time they needed a play, they would just go back to the same thing. Why? Because it's a simple concept. Everybody knows what they're doing, and now the detail of the execution of the individual or specific plays that they got into can really be focused on for the rest of the week. So as you look at that from like a game plan perspective, okay, this is how we're going to attack this team. This is why it's going to work. Now we're going to focus on these 3 or 4 plays, and we're going to be so detailed and disciplined. We're going to be so good at those plays that they're going to be very difficult to stop. So I just love that whole concept and process of preaching simplicity, so now we can be detailed and disciplined at the scheme level, at the objective of the match perspective. Number 4, specificity. It's imperative that an athlete can close their eyes and associate the learning material directly with what happens on the field. So I can close my eyes, I can see the drill that we're doing now, how it applies specifically to what I am trying to accomplish in my part of the game on the field of play. If a drill has a player scratching their head or not quite seeing the association, it might be a great drill, but it might not be the right drill for that player or that group of players. Because we want to incorporate the when and the where of specific techniques. I want players to be able to see the purpose. I can see the play unfolding. I can see how I'd insert myself into that sequence. How would I use the specified technique, etc. Teaching in concepts allows for specificity. It all, as you can imagine, all of this stacks on one another. You have your process, you have your technique, you have your simplicity. Now, teaching in simplistic concepts allows for specificity. If an athlete can identify the concept, they can see the adjustment needed for the specific solution being referred to. And remember the concept that, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so talk less, demonstrate more, show more video, give them visual examples. So to recap, we've hit process-based, technique, simplicity, and specificity. And the next one is maybe the most important of all, teaching the why. Teaching the why before the how. We want to have athletes buy in. We want to make them committed stakeholders in our process, and we have to give them a reason. As someone who's interested in development, I want curious athletes. I want players who understand concepts and can make the best decisions based on the information available. And you cannot make the best decisions if you don't understand the why. This is part of becoming a master of your craft. And it's something as parents and coaches we must champion and we must foster. Great teachers teach the why, and elite athletes know the why. And so one of the best examples I can give you is a post-game interview that I saw in a losing effort from Hall of Fame quarterback Peyton Manning. I think Manning had just thrown a pick in a crucial situation. He was, they lost the game, and he was asked about the throw after the game. And Peyton just said flat out, the defender was in the wrong spot. The defender shouldn't have been there. So he certainly wasn't making an excuse on why he threw the pick. He's just explaining, I know exactly what's going on in this game. I know why I'm running that play. I know what defense they're in, why I'm attacking it there, why I threw that ball. And he made an assumption that they'd run their scheme correctly, and they didn't. But having the conceptual knowledge about the opposing scheme and how to attack it is a hallmark of all great quarterbacks, point guards, scrum halves in rugby. And it's so crucial that we foster that idea not only in just kind of the generals or the captains of our team, but the foot soldiers. Everybody who is involved, who wants to be a committed stakeholder, needs to understand why we are doing things. And so we're not looking for question and answer period every time we insert a drill. But certainly, while we're doing things or as we're presenting concepts, we want to explain the why. It's no longer a society of let's blindly follow this person because they're in a position of authority. I think those days are gone. That's certainly how I grew up, largely how I grew up. But I think those days are gone, and we need to acknowledge that this generation of athletes, they need to know that to get buy-in. And it's worth it because you can see the greatest players on the planet do have that deep understanding, do have that curiosity. They're not robots, and that's because they've been offered the why for many, many, many years. Our final core conviction, intensity. And we've spoken at length about, the tenets of training for mental toughness. Train at a level higher than game day. Believe that it's important and do it on a consistent basis. Now, a lot of people think of intensity and they think of, somebody who's in a full sweat and they're just practicing so hard, and she's the hardest working player on the court during, and maybe, they're banging their head against the wall, or they're getting really hyped up before the game. And that is, all those are a form of intensity. Another form of intensity that I really want to champion, because I think it's so important to true development, is one that was displayed and has been displayed by many people, but the last person I saw was Mike Pouncey when he was playing for the Miami Dolphins. Now, Mike is an extremely talented player, all-pro, very, very smart guy. He's a good athlete. What's special about him is his desire to be great. It's not his athletic ability. And to give you an example, when I talk about intensity with a guy like Mike, when we do a walkthrough in the NFL, a walkthrough is something where a lot of guys will just go through the motions. We don't call it, 25%. We don't call it 50%. The way that on this podcast we talk about things in percentages, because we want that perfect execution at a reduced speed. They'll walk through sloppy footwork, sloppy technique. And Mike always stood out in that group in particular because every one of his movements was perfect. He was this 4 to 6 inch step, ankle, knee, and hip bend, hands inside, pad level low, in a walkthrough. Every opportunity to get better is something that you should grab onto. That's the kind of intensity that we really want to champion. And as young athletes, as aspiring athletes, and as parents and coaches that are trying to foster these improvement models, we really need to take a look at all opportunities to get, what you call a mental rep, right? Every chance to go through the pattern in the correct motion is a chance to improve. Every opportunity to do it the wrong way because it's a walkthrough or because it doesn't matter, because it's not as important because we're not live. Every opportunity to do that is just an opportunity to break it or to develop a new bad habit. So to recap, my core convictions are process-based, technique first, simplicity, specificity, teaching the why, and coming with some intensity. So that's the call to action today. Take my list, change it, make it your own. But write it down. It's worthwhile. Write it down. If you send it over to me, I will put it up on Instagram and Twitter, at Unrivaled ESS or Unrivaled Systems on Instagram. Again, hit me up with any questions on those, or if you want to hit me at info@unrivaledsystems.com. I love interacting with all of you out there, and if I can help in any way, certainly let me know. Again, this is Process to Perform. I'm going to try to up the amount of podcasts. We'll try to do 3 every 2 weeks. That's been one of the requests. So hopefully we'll come with more information. Anybody ideas out there, hit me up. Thanks a lot.